You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding. I'm a hoarder who needed an outlet to talk about this unusual and isolating mental illness. And because my hoarding is secret, I started this podcast to talk about it. Subscribe to the podcast and find my social media links, episode transcripts, and every link that I mention at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. So I am here with Steve Chapman, an artist, writer, speaker and coach who talks and writes about creativity, imperfection, being stuck, shame and the inner critic, all of which apply to a lot of us. He has trained in Gestalt psychology, improv theatre, coaching and art therapy. And he's here today to talk about a different, maybe even counterintuitive way to approach our inner critics. So, Steve, how are you?
I'm really excited to be here. And that's a really nice introduction. I normally hate introductions, but that felt very sweet and reassuring. Yeah, and thank you so much for inviting me on.
So I have spent years battling with my inner critic. She is relentless and persistent and unspeakably cruel at times. I have tried arguing with her. I've tried silencing her. I've tried ignoring her, bargaining with her. Then a few weeks ago, I got obsessed with a song called Hi Ren. I couldn't stop watching and rewatching this incredibly powerful depiction of one person's inner battles. And it made me reconsider my lifelong battles with my inner critic. What if fighting with her just emboldened her or angered her? It certainly didn't shut her up, which had always been the goal. So that song pushed me to look for alternative ways to deal with an inner critic. Is it possible to integrate yourself and your critic into one messy, contradictory being instead of being two messy, contradictory fighting beings? What I found was a TEDx talk, and the title grabbed me immediately because it was called This Talk Isn't Very Good by Steve, who has a wholly different approach to dealing with his relentless and cruel inner critic. So, Steve, before we talk about the approach you eventually took, can you tell me about your relationship with that voice before you changed how you deal with it?
I think I didn't realize that I was in a relationship with that voice or that part of me. It just was there. It's like, it's only when you start to notice something or talk about it or bring it into the light, you think, actually, that's a bit strange. So I think it was just silently in the background until I started going, hold on, there's something interesting here. But no doubt affecting me in everything that I did right from being a child, right from early years. So it's not to say there wasn't an impact, but yeah, I think I was just generally unaware of it.
Yeah. What do you think the purpose is of our inner critic?
Well, I mean, my understanding of it, and whilst I've trained in things like Gestalt and that, I'm not a therapist. But for doing this work, my understanding is the overall intention is to keep us safe and in vital relationships. So a lot of therapists will say that it's formed early in life when we are basically helpless babies. We're dependent on other people's affection. So we cry and we respond and we make cute baby faces to get that attention that we want. And so it's about maintaining that vital connection. But my good friend Simon Caviccia, who I do lots of inner critic work with, who is a Gestalt psychotherapist, says the structure remains the same as we get older, but the content gets updated to be age appropriate. So as a baby, it's about our vital survival. And then at school, it's maybe about fitting in. And then as a teenager, it's about relationships. And then it's about getting a job. And then it's about blah, 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 blah. But the structure remains the same. So that's one of the reasons why I thought if ultimately this is a part of me that's trying to look after me, but in a very deluded and exaggerated and hurtful way, why would I want to do battle with it? Because that's some sort of psychological self-harm. Again, for me, I'm thinking that. And that was the start point. It's like, okay, I'm really interested in the counterintuitive. I have a strange neurodiverse mind that thinks in patterns and shapes and opposites. So I thought, rather than move away from it or try to escape it, what happens if I just play with it and invite it to play? And because it sort of despises creativity and risk taking, what if I got to know it in a creative way that was taking risks? And then that was sort of the start of it, really.
You had that turning point that you're describing when you started to investigate him and draw him. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'm really interested in words, in the sense that words are really helpful and words create worlds and words like connect people and convey um, ideas and meaning, but they're also really limiting. And there's an entire world beyond words. And as a dyslexic, I can have a feeling or an emotion and not have a word for it, but it doesn't mean it's not real. So it was just that inability to describe it in a way that felt satisfying to me made me think, well, what if I just started drawing it and just put pen on paper? And the first thing that I noticed is, of course, the inner critic starts going, that's not how I look, which could be a point that people start giving up. When I've done this work with others, it's like, oh, no, I can't draw. And it's like, brilliant. Draw the bit of you that's saying that you can't draw. Draw the bit of you that's saying, I don't look like this. And I like to think that these little creative things are like, instead of being in a massive grip of an inner critic attack, which is just the terminology that I like to use, or like being suppressed by the inner critic, it's really hard to do the work then. But I think these little creative experiments are like putting a little bit of cheese outside its mouse hole just to get it to come out and have a little sniff, and then you can have a look at it, and then a bigger bit of cheese. So that's what the drawing started like. It's like, okay, it's starting to have a bit of a shape, a bit of character. I'm starting to personify it a bit. And then some of the drawings, I think the early drawings were like of a professor type. It's like, actually, I think this is a lot of transference about my academic performance at school. And like, this is the type of person that would be disapproving of my academic achievements. And so it started to give a bit more 3D understanding of it.
So, inspired by your talk, I decided to draw my inner critic.
All right. Okay.
And was instantly beset by reminders from my inner critic that I cannot draw.
Right.
I was going, well, he can draw it because he's an artist. Why? Why do I think I can draw it? But I went for it anyway.
Yeah.
Because you have a gallery of other people's drawings of their inner critics, which I will link to in the show notes, and that inspired me to try. So I'm going to show you, and I'll also put them on social media.
Yeah.
So first of all, I tried to draw like an angry, barking dog.
Yeah.
Right? Let me.
Yeah.
What I actually drew was a really happy dog.
Oh, lovely.
So I thought, okay, it needs to be angrier.
Yeah.
So I drew a thrilled dog.
Yeah. Wow.
And I was like, okay, so let's put the angry dog to one side. And I drew like a generic person with various things, but that didn't feel quite right. So what I ended up with was like a hybrid monster person in weird colours that it has a black speech bubble.
Yeah.
And I don't know quite why that felt more right, but it did.
Yeah. How was that process of doing all the different drawings?
I think initially I was like, this just proves I can't do this.
Yeah.
And then I got a bit determined and I was like, no, I'm going to have something.
Yeah.
I think if I hadn't known we were having this call, I might have given up earlier.
Right.
But I thought, no, I'd got my pens out. I'd found a notepad. I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
And I think by the final one, I was like, it is not what I had in my head.
Yeah.
It is not that, but it is something that feels representative of something that the image in my head was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. And thank you so much for sharing them. It's always inspiring and moving to see other people's things. And that's the thing, is because we're working in lines and shapes, and you do have words on that final image, it gives us so much to work with. It's like we can start to ask questions of it. And even those early ones, it's like, it may be that our inner critic or our historic art teachers say, no, that's not right. But even that first one, it's like, oh, wow, the dog's happy. So what's the dog happy about? The dog's happy about, and it's got big teeth. The dog's happy because it keeps getting fed this food. And so one of the things I love about it, and I encourage people to do, is treat everything as potentially relevant. Like all of those drawings as being potentially relevant. Whatever comes out. Linda Barry's an amazing art teacher that, if people want to read her work, I can't remember, she wrote a book called Syllabus. She's done a load of beautifully illustrated books. And she said, people say to me, I can't draw. And I say to them, what do you mean? And they say, well, the stuff on the page doesn't match what's in my head. And she says, well, that's of course it doesn't. What's in your head is a thought. Drawing comes out the body. And that's just such an amazing thing. It's like those dogs. The more you try to draw an angry dog, the more excited the dog is. How is that potentially relevant about the nature of your inner critic? And then also with that last one, it's just starting. Yeah, I'm just really excited and inspired by you sharing it.
Thank you.
And it only needs to make sense to you. That's the thing. That's the other place where I get trapped and people get trapped. Is like, how am I going to explain this to anyone else? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if no one else ever sees it. The act of doing it creates a little bit of distance, a little bit of understanding, and it's just for you.
Yeah. My ex was very arty, and she must have suggested we do something arty. And I said, oh, no, 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 I can't draw. And she said, when did you decide you couldn't draw?
Yeah,
And I remember it really clearly. I was 10.
yeah,
This thing had happened at school, and I'd done something I thought was okay. And then I looked at other people's and realized mine was terrible. And at that
yeah,
moment, and she was like, you can't decide something at 10
yeah,
and have that still apply in your 40s.
yeah,
And it did make me step back and think, yeah, there's something in that.
yeah. Well, it's a lot of the stuff that I've uncovered with my inner critic are things I decided were true about me, probably pre-verbally,
Yeah.
probably about the age of 5 or 7, and then layered on in life. So, whilst logically, I think, how can we still be thinking this in our 30s, 40s, 50s? Of course we can, because of the weird creatures that we are. And I mean, that's Linda Barry has a similar question to what you just said there. And she says to people, how old were you when you did your first bad drawing? And I often use that question. How old were you when you did your first bad poem or your first bad something or other? And most people can locate it, and it tends to be at school or around people early in life. And then we make that decision. I've found that people that consider themselves good at art find this work even harder, counterintuitively. A lot of challenges that I give to people, like in strange workshops and stuff, is like, can you do the most terrible portrait of someone that you've ever done? But it has to be the worst portrait. The people that consider themselves artists struggle with it, struggle to let go of that very disciplined form. And I find it, I sometimes do stuff with my left hand or use materials I can't use properly, because then I get the helpful accidents rather than that perfection. And it's in the accidents and the wonkiness that the gold is, I think.
Yeah. So when you've asked other people to draw their inner critics, how do they tend to find that experience?
It's normally as part of something else. So it might be on the start of the second day of a 2-day workshop or something like that, or maybe as part of an ongoing like one-to-one work. I've always been surprised how easily people access it. The most difficult thing is making the first mark. It's just make a mark on a page. That's what all drawing is for me, or painting is. You make an intuitive mark and then make a mark in response to that mark, and then make a mark in response to those marks. And you're getting into an inquiry with it, thinking, "Oh, what is this? What's beyond this bit? What's inside this bit? What color is this bit? What does this bit need?" And even like with young children, I've experimented with in a couple of things, how easily it comes to them. And in the gallery, there's some really young children. So I've been surprised how quickly it comes for people, how the more they stick with it and the more they revisit it and use it as a live thing, the more information it yields. I think that's one of the things, like lots of people journal. You don't just write one page of a journal and go, that's it, I'm done. I've done journaling now.
So true.
And it's the same with it's the same with art. You create a piece. That isn't the end of it. You then inquire into it and move into it and find out more on what's behind that bit and sort of zoom into it. And with all of my art, I do that. It's largely improvised, and I'm working out what it is in relation to the previous bit. So it seems to come, or in my experience, it can come easily to people to be given permission to do that. And having seen other people's stuff makes it easier, because it feels less shameful. This whole idea that shame gathers its strength by like lurking in the shadows. And it's the whole reason I did that TEDx talk. Was I thought, what's the biggest stage I can find to put my inner critic on and see what happens? It might have been a disaster, but it's like the more spotlights on our shame, it's really hard to do, but it diminishes its power. And I think that's what the drawing does, is it brings some light to those things that feel terrible.
So you drew your inner critic repeatedly over a period of time.
Yeah.
You ultimately made a puppet of him.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did that change your relationship with your inner critic?
It's still ongoing. And I think it would be, I really wanted that TEDx talk to be inconclusive. Like, because really a good TED talk is like, this was terrible. I did this and now it's solved and now you can solve it for yourself. And I just thought that's nonsense. So at the end of it, I'm just saying, look, this is an ongoing thing. I've realized this is life's work. I'm just part of what it means to be human. And I think just having that awareness of it, just having that awareness, if I know the things that will trip me up, um, I think the way that it's changed now is I would struggle to say any words my inner critic says to me now. I think it's totally in my body. So it's almost like the words have been, what's it called when you exercise? The words have been exercised, and now it's just stuff that's really in my body. So I would notice when stuff's bothering me, and it's really hard to do. But I've got into the habit of that whole Buddhist idea of the obstacle is the path. That when I notice there's something that I might label as my inner critic around, I sort of try and move towards it rather than away from it. Try and meet it with a compassion and curiosity. And it's funny, I was thinking this the other day. In some areas of the work that I do, I'm really bothered by what other people think. Like I play music and sometimes perform at open mic nights. So it's just songs I've written with a guitar. And I hate the idea of it. I hate doing it and I hate having done it afterwards because I'm too bothered about what other people think about it. But with art now, I've realized that I sort of don't care. I do it just for me. If someone else likes it, brilliant. If they hate it, I really don't care. And I think that's part of that shifting relationship. But like I say, in other areas of life, it really bothers me still. But yeah, I think it's nice to know that my inner critic's still there because like I say, at the heart of it, there is a good intention, but horribly distorted.
The thing about not wanting the talk to be conclusive makes me think of my personality is much more suited to doing a podcast saying, this is how I fix the thing.
Yeah.
Whereas what I am doing is doing a podcast that says, I'm working this out and I'm getting
Yeah.
bits right and I'm getting bits wrong. And that's really out of my comfort zone, but I think good for me.
Yeah. And I think probably good for every single person that listens to it as well. Because it's a sneaky trap, isn't it? Thinking that there's something to be fixed. Right. I'm broken in a way and I need to fix it. And until I can fix it, I'm broken. And that pursuit of this fixed, whatever that is, doesn't exist. So it's just a perpetual way of giving ourselves a hard time. But it sounds like for what I'm saying in the TED talk and what this podcast is that we're all a work in progress. And imagine if we became, I always think this, imagine if we became the final article. It's like everything's solved. I know where do you go from there? So I really like the idea of remaining somewhat of a mystery to myself. Really frustrating and really hard at times, but also it's like, yeah, maybe that's what everything's about. And so, yeah, I admire you doing that. And it can be hard to do because there's so much of the opposite around. There's so much of the like, do this and fix this.
5 steps to
Yeah.
yeah.
And maybe that works for people. So I'm not knocking it. It only seems to work for the people that are presenting it in my experience. And then they seem fucked up in other ways. But yeah, we're all working. This is the thing I say with the inner critic stuff is the most important thing is you work out your own way of doing it. It's like, I don't know what would help you. Only you could know. And that's the thing for some people, it will be finding ways of silencing it or being assertive with it and going, no, get out of here. That might work. For me, this creative response really works. And I think where it's really helped me is as soon as my inner critic shows up for duty saying, this is a terrible idea, I then know that it's a really good one. It's something I haven't done before. I mean, I'm not stupid. I'm old enough to know that if it's an idea that might harm me or others, then I probably won't do it. But if it's just, that's a bad idea, you're going to get rejected as a human being and be lost in the wilderness forevermore. It's like, come on, that's really not going to happen if I do this silent podcast or if I do this book or if I do this thing. It's, yeah. But this is where I said in the talk that it's sort of become a bit of my muse, really. It's like I think I said in the talk, it's like it's become an annoying flatmate that I learned to live with because he pays the rent. And I don't even know if he has a gender anymore. I've no idea. It's just this feeling.
So in the talk, you say at one point when your inner critic has reappeared after a quiet period.
Yeah.
In that moment, I realised that this is a game without end, an ongoing game of cat and mouse. And you make a point of saying, as you have today, that you've not defeated your inner critic.
Yeah.
You describe it as a dance. And a lot of people will be trapped in that ongoing battle with the inner critic.
Yeah.
Can you talk about dancing with our inner critics instead of the fight that a lot of people get stuck in?
Yeah. I mean, as well as doing this, if it was important to say, as well as like doing this creative inquiry, this therapeutic inquiry, there is a place for working with deeper therapy. So if there's unresolved trauma, I've worked with a therapist for, I don't know, 8 years now, and I'll carry on as long as I can afford it. Because a lot of this will come from imprints early in life. So that's not to say to do this will solve anything, but the the battle is, I think, is just finding ways to get that little bit of a distance. Like, this isn't a universal description of me, and that may just be even acknowledging that, hold on, this is not of now. This voice is not of now. It's of something else. It's of some universal, aggregated description of what I should be. This is an unattainable self-image that's been imprinted on me by society and my background and all of that. And just to get that slight bit of distance, and if it helps to do battle or to make a model of your inner critic and beat it up, and then if it brings some relief, then that's helpful. For me, it is that doing Tai Chi with it. I like the mischief of that. I like the creativity of it. It's like, whatever the next move is, I'm going to come up with a creative response. It's like an improvised dance with the inner critic. And over time, like with other support, like friends, with sharing with other people, with realizing it's not just you, with therapy or coaching if it's needed, it starts to shift. But in a way that I describe as, it doesn't feel. I think I can easily be led to believe that this gets resolved and goes away, but it just starts to feel different. And I really, yeah, I don't know if mine's just shifted in a particular way. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that doing battle takes up energy as well.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, and it's that constant vigilance and attention just takes up a lot of energy, and it is very exhausting. So finding ways in which to dance with it and be resilient. The idea of like Tai Chi or other martial arts like that is you're using the energy that's coming towards you in a way to then give the energy back, and it just becomes that flow, that to and fro of stuff. But I think that whole thing of, I've done workshops before where lots of people have made models or drawn or moved like their inner critic, and the biggest relief is, oh, it's not just me. Because that's part of this shame trap that it can get us in, is you're not good enough. You've got no way of becoming good enough. And you can't tell anyone that this is going on, because then they'll all definitely know you're broken. And it's that first move, like you've done with this podcast, that starts to let other people go, actually, no, it's not just me. And even if there's one other person, it just starts to bring a little bit of a sense of solidarity, and even just 0.001% dials down that shame that we feel from it.
Yeah, yeah. One aspect of your approach I want to hear more about, because I instinctively find it quite challenging, but I'm also fascinated by. You talk of taking care of your demons,
Yeah.
which might initially sound bonkers. It
Yeah.
is counterintuitive, but can you talk about why you decided your inner critic needed care and what the result of that was? I hope you're finding this episode interesting. In order to help me continue bringing you content like this week after week, your support is crucial. This independent podcast wouldn't be possible without listeners like you. I pour my heart and soul into it, and I fund the podcast myself, from microphones to computer software to hosting costs. So I'm asking for your help if you can. Whether you can offer a one-off donation, or you want to become a de-hoarding darling with a monthly contribution, any amount makes a huge difference. Find out more at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/donate.
I mean, there's a few different things there. One is that I think I was inspired by, there's a Thich Nhat Hanh quote that I think is so long ago since I did that talk, but I can't remember the quote. But it was something like, if we do battle with this energy within us, it consumes us. We must meet it and take care of it. Otherwise it will destroy us. Something like that. So that was like, okay, that makes sense. Part of taking care of it was, the more I drew it, it's like it doesn't seem very happy. And sort of we're doing through like two chair work, like we do in a critic workshop and other things. It's like actually this thing at its heart seems to be suffering in a way, or it's deluded, or it's angry, and it's I wonder why that is. So sort of developing some empathy for it, and even it doesn't mean that we are agreeing with what it says, but it's like a self compassion practice. It's like because we can have like a double whammy. It's like oh no, my inner critic showed up, and then we give ourselves a hard time for it showing up. That's a double whammy process. Whereas, oh, here's the inner critic. I thought you might show up. Yeah, what is it you're worried about today? Yeah, I'd rather you didn't, but you're here. I know that there's something that you need from me. Why don't you tell me what it is? Let's sit down and have a cup of tea. And that self-compassion practice is so powerful and simple, and I find it the hardest thing, absolutely the hardest thing. And an insight for me was I get really bothered by noise, like easily distracted by noise. I have poor sensory gating, which is great as a creative and artist because you're bombarded with ideas, but noise bothers me. And I don't know, about 6 or 7 years ago, I was on the Isle of Wight, and I found a really, really quiet beach, like no one else on it. And I like being in nature with just nature sounds. I live by the Thames here, and it's crazy that people hire boats and play really loud music and shout going up and down the Thames. It's like, don't you just want to hear nature? But I found this really quiet beach with no one around, and I spent the entire time on that beach worrying that someone was going to turn up with like noisy stereo, big group of noisy people. And I was getting really angry with myself, thinking, I can't even relax here. Why can't I even relax here? And then I just had a moment where I thought, oh, but that's what I do. That's me. That's who I am. And it's like, oh, yeah, oh, I'm worrying about that thing again. That's okay. We'd both rather it didn't happen, but yeah, that's all right. And I spoke to my therapist about that, and she said, yeah, that's self-compassion. So I think that's part of it is if I'm doing battle, and also if I'm doing battle, I sort of want the inner critic to relax a little bit and show more of itself. So the more I can lure it out without being consumed by battle, the moment we go into a fight or flight mode, we go into like really focused foveal awareness. The more I can engage with it in a slightly calmer, open, more parasympathetic way, the more I'm going to notice as well. And it's just the energy of the battles like takes so much time. And then I've made some and sold lots of art that I've made in response to my inner critic, which I never set out to make stuff for people to like or sell, but probably similar to the podcast, I'm doing it just for me as this unfinished thing. Other people see something in it, so that's the relationship I've got into with it. And I still struggle with so many things. So we're keen to point out that this isn't a thing that resolves everything in life, but that particular part, particularly those judgments about what a person of my age and background and gender and everything else should be doing at this point in life, and is it good enough? That's a lot quieter. Maybe that comes with age as well, but I really think it's come through getting into a relationship with it. And why would I want to kill it? Why would I want to kill it off when it was a vitally important thing for me when I was a tiny baby? Simon Coviccia just says it's like it's got the energy and the intelligence of maybe a 4-year-old child, but thinks it knows everything that's best for you. And he'll say stuff like, 'cause he's a psychotherapist, his inner critic will say things like, "Oh, that wasn't a very good session that you had there." And he'll say things to it like, so remind me, where did you train as a psychotherapist inner critic? Because I don't remember seeing your certificate. So sarcasm works for him. But anything that works or brings some relief. And if you're generating stuff through the process of doing it, I always draw emotions now. I always draw difficult stuff. I will move to all the painting things and just seeing what happens.
You make a strong argument for luring our inner critics out of the shadows and into the light using playfulness and creativity. I feel like a lot of people instinctively, that feels risky to shine light on that cruelty.
Yeah.
How do you see other people be able to take that risk?
Yeah. Now, I think I think this is unique for everyone in how much and that approach. But there's maybe two things. One is that idea that shame gets locked up in the shadows because it's too much of a shameful thing to bring out. I think the Brené Brown quote around shame is something I've done or something I've failed to do is making me unworthy of human connection. So I can't possibly ever let anyone know that. And then it festers. So and then there's shaming things in society. Like for me, just talking about mental health or talking about this type of stuff, there'll be other people, because it's their own stuff, will go, oh no, that's broken, that's bad. So shame is the most difficult, I think, the most difficult thing to work with, which is why it's easier to keep it locked up. So that's that thing. But for me, it's the mouse hole analogy. It's just even getting a little whisker or even hearing a little scurry. Can we do things when we're in a resource state just to catch a tiny little glimpse of it? And it may be just you hear it scuttling at the other end of the mouse hole, or it pokes its head out, or to where I got to, like making the puppet and then bringing it on stage and things like that. But I think it's maybe finding that, what I like to say is that sort of sweet spot of discomfort, which isn't that you're totally avoiding it to be comfortable. There's nothing wrong with comfort zones. I don't know why everyone writes get outside your comfort zone. I really like my comfort zone. It's there for a reason. But it's also not the other end where it's a distress and overwhelm zone. So it's, what is that just enough spot? And that will be helpful for everyone, just to bring a little bit of light to it, a tiny chink of light. And then maybe the tiny chink of light is sharing that with someone else that's doing this work, or someone else that's trusted. And then it slowly, I think it shifts, but for me, it's slowly diminished how much of a terrible secret it is. I couldn't imagine having this conversation with anyone, let alone on a podcast 15 years ago. It'd be like, oh my God, no. To admit I'm this broken, I'll never get any work again or have any friends or relationships. But I think that's the thing, is like tiny little things. And then, of course, the inner critic will be, all right, is that it? Is that all you're going to do? You haven't defeated me. You've just, yeah. But fine, then you've got more to work with. The more it shows up, the more you've got to work with.
You run workshops on dancing with your inner critic. First of all, how do they go? But also, how do people react to those who attend?
Yeah, so that's what I've been running those with Simon, who I've mentioned a few times. And the reason why Simon Kaviccia and I started working together is I met him when I was faculty at Ashridge Business School a few years ago, or 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And he's a Gestalt psychotherapist that writes a lot about shame and the inner critic. I was interested in the inner critic and am coming at it from an artistic perspective. So we combined our interest and fascination to create these workshops. And we only run the workshops for our own inquiry. It's like we're doing our own work with other people, which is the main thing. And they've just become amazing things to do. We don't do them that often, maybe couple of times a year, a few times a year. But what's really important is the framing and the way in which they run. So at the start of it, we were just saying to people that, look, there's nothing to be achieved here. There's nothing to be achieved here. So as soon as you start thinking there's something to be achieved here, then we're already failing. This is about becoming more deeply aware of what's already there. And by deepening awareness, we recover choice. And it's just for you. You don't need to apply anything. So there's something about that where we're not going in thinking, I need to solve this thing. And then we're using just a load of different ways of sort of deepening that inquiry. Or Simon's got a lovely metaphor for this work being, it's like archaeology. Instead of going in with a pickaxe, you're gently brushing away the layers and and then suddenly you'll find something. And so we'll do some work around movement, some work around improvisation and spontaneity. We use clay, we do mindfulness, we use some Gestalt experiments with 2-chair work. And it's just all about those different cycles, bringing something into relief. And then really what we're helping people to do is to develop the muscle of recognizing when their inner critic shows up for duty, to identify what it's got to say and what it's doing, what's bothering it, what is it worried about, what's it concerned about. Then to develop this dance with it, to how do you use what's coming at you. And then finally that starts just to get a bit of distance. And it's a thing that we call the sort of rid process. And it isn't a utopian solution because it doesn't solve anything, but it's a good process. So recognize, identify, dance and distance. And people are getting it at the end of the workshop, they're getting to the start of their ongoing inquiry rather than something finished. And I just am really touched by it. There's something about doing it in community that makes it feel safe enough to do that. There's enough structure to hold, but enough structure to discover stuff. And we did a version of it online as well, which I was really frustrated during lockdown when people just took a face-to-face thing and dumped it online. It doesn't work doing that. So we crafted something right from scratch so we could do it across continents. And again, even with that, that's over like 6 weeks that we do that one. I think the people that are allowing just a gentle deepening awareness to be enough get a lot more from it. than if we're seeking something.
Yeah, if you go in wanting to pass the course,
Yeah.
that creates pressure and also is really limiting.
Yeah. And again, maybe that will work for other people. Maybe there's a 1 day or a 1 hour workshop where you slay your inner critic for good. And it's brilliant if that works for people. For me, this approach is it develops a practice rather than a solution. And I always think the solutions end up being imbued with a problem in a way as well. It's like, but yeah, it's a practice. It's what is the ongoing practice of our inner critic? What's the ongoing practice of our mental and physical health? And that's sort of what we're aiming for in them.
As you talk, I find myself thinking of one of the ways I deal with anxiety these days, which took decades to work out. But if kind of panic is rising, I try to go, oh, hey, what's going on? What are you
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
tell me?
yeah,
What is scary and what do I need to do, or what can I learn from the fact that something is scary that I wasn't expecting to be scary?
yeah,
And I was thinking of that as you were talking because it's kind of being more objective rather than reactive.
yeah,
And also that distance, like,
yeah,
oh, hey, you over there, I see you're coming in hard.
yeah,
There's clearly something up. Or even, I see you're there. I'm in the middle of something. I will pay attention to you in half an hour.
yeah.
To get a bit extra, you can become a de-hoarding darling. Hear answers from interviewees and me to extra questions, get suggestions and recommendations, and get a Spotify playlist to de-hoard to. You can also feel warm and glowy in the knowledge that you're helping to support the podcast. Find out everything you need to know at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. That's overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a lovely practice, isn't it? Because when we're happy or it's a positive experience or emotion, we're not going, oh, why is this here now? Why am I experiencing this? Maybe we do. I mean, if I do, then I might think that. But it's like these emotions and these sensations are showing up for a reason. Now, it may be a distorted reason, and it may be to do with our nervous system being dysregulated in some way, but it's showing up for a reason. So why not be curious about it? It's like if we cut ourselves, we feel pain to draw attention to the fact that something's not right. So that's what I'm always thinking is what this must be showing up for a reason, and it may be a distorted reason, and it may be a really old reason, and I might be associating this thing now with something from a long time ago. And that's where in all of this work and in the work I do for myself or one-to-one with people or in the work that you're doing at the workshop, this is more than just working with cognition and language and words. It's like there's an entire domain of awareness that we rarely tune into because society privileges logic and the head. It's like our bodies are ways of getting our head from meeting to meeting or to do the important work. Whereas there's as much data in emotions and our senses and our physiology and our physical position and our body sensation. All of that is as valid as a thought. And the more we can tune into that, it's like this is where now I think I start to notice stuff in my body that I couldn't possibly have words for. It's like I don't know what it is. Why am I feeling this? But I sort of don't need words for it to be real. I only need words if I need to explain it to someone else. It's like if we see a beautiful sunset, to experience that sunset, we don't need words. It's like, oh, I wish I had the poetic words to describe this so I can fully experience it. We only need words if we can articulate it to someone else.
I think that's why on my third drawing, which was the head with different phrases,
Yeah.
I didn't stop there because I felt like that was a bit of a cop out because
Right.
what I had done was use words and what I was trying
Yeah.
to do was express it without words.
Yeah. Well, and this may sound contradictory, the words are really helpful as well because the stock phrases of the inner critic, like what are the types of things that it would say are really helpful as well. So I think it's working in all of those domains. It's because then we just think, so where's that coming from? Where did that belief about myself come from? How is that protecting me in a way? So yeah, words and movement. And the great thing about working with stuff like clay is you're totally working 3D as well. And we always have clay at the workshops if people want to use it. And then someone might create a hole and that's what's inside that hole. And then you can go inside the hole. So I think being open to multiple ways of working. I mean, it's crazy that even qualifications like art have to end up with words in them. It's like I used to supervise dissertations, master's dissertations, and it's such a shame that they have to end up in the written word. It's like, can someone not dance their dissertation? I think it's shifting. Can someone not paint it? So it's getting closer to it. But yeah, it's the thinking. I can't remember. There's something that I watched about like hallucinogenics and different thoughts, said that society's got this very narrow way of only valuing thought that results in the commoditization or the growth or the productivity of something. Something that doesn't feel like it has a point is discarded. Whereas I love starting workshops, particularly corporate workshops, and saying, look, there's no point to this. There's nothing to achieve, because it freaks people out because we're so used to that. But as soon as we let go of it having to be anything in particular, then it can become anything we want.
Yeah. Now, I always ask guests what an extra question for subscribers only. So this is the bit where I ask guests an extra question. It's sometimes a slightly silly one. And Hoarding Darlings get access to this extra question and the answer. If you would like to become a Hoarding Darling, to get access to the extra question and some extra stuff from me every month, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. So, Steve, thank you for that really incredible insight, and it's giving me so much to think about. If people want to find you online, find out more, where can they do so?
So a couple of places is I'm most active on Instagram, just because I haven't got the energy to do every social platform. But Instagram, it's at SteveXOH. There's a backstory behind that in my links as to what that is. And website, I've got loads of different websites, but they all link up through canscorpionsmoke.com. So canscorpionsmoke.com. And that's got a link through to workshops, to talks, to podcasts. I'll put a link to this one on there, to my shop and art things and all of that. And if anyone wants to get in touch, just stevexoh@gmail.com.
Amazing. Thank you, Steve. Really useful conversation.
No, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed exploring it. And thank you for sharing your inner critics. And an experiment that came to mind. I wonder what would happen if all of your drawings had a conversation with each other. What do they have in common between them? What can they gang up on together about you that you could eavesdrop on? I love that as an experiment.
I think the happy dog would want to know the secret of the thrilled dog.
Yeah.
What's going on there to make you that happy?
Yeah. Good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's the bit where that hoarder shouts out someone wise.
Shout out to the Daily Pep podcast with Meg Kissack, who is a former guest on this very podcast. Have a listen to what she says about using your stuff.
Kind of like the same way that we might save our really good mugs for a special occasion, a really meaningful journal for our best ideas, or we're visiting a beautiful place and we can't quite stay in the moment because we know that the moment is fleeting and we don't know if we'll be back there again. So my message for both you and me today is this: there will be more good shit. And I think part of this is trusting ourselves that we'll find it and trusting that it is out there in the first place. I think a lot of this comes from scarcity thinking, and we know our brains have a natural tendency to lean towards the negative. So I say, let's get intentional about believing that good shit really is out there. There are books that you are gonna love. There are songs that you are gonna just get totally enthralled by. There are people that you've not met yet that are gonna light your world on fire. And you can also enjoy the things in the moment. I get to finish that really good book because I'm really enjoying it, and I trust that there will be more good books. You get to write in that journal because there will be more good ideas, I promise you. So for today, here's to remembering there is always more good shit. Here's to rebelling against scarcity thinking. And here's to giving ourselves the permission to dare to really enjoy things.
I always love Meg's take on things. I hope you find that little message helpful. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast.